in the days before sophisticated medical equipment could definitely determine when someone had passed from this world to the next. Many people feared being buried alive and enacted strict post-passing protocols to ensure it didn't happen. In Buried Alive, The Terrifying History of Our Most Primal Fear, author Jan Bonderson and some of the measures taken to guard against being buried alive, including coffins that featured a bell or flag that would warn passers-by of any movement down below. While many reported cases of burials of the living were exaggerated, Bonderson did unearth a few cases of people who were put in their graves while still breathing. 1. The shoemaker. In 1822, a 40-year-old German shoemaker was laid to rest, but there were questions about his death from the start. Although the shoemaker's family confirmed his passing, he looked dead. They said no one could detect any stench or rigidity in the cadaver. Still, the funeral went on as planned, but as the gravedigger was dispersing the last shovels full of dirt onto the grave, he heard a knocking from below. Reversing his process, and now removing the earth as quickly as possible, the gravedigger found the shoemaker moving inside his coffin. His arms were drawn upward. He wasn't cold, and when an attending physician opened a vein, blood flowed all over the shroud. Over the course of 3 days, resuscitation attempts were made, but all efforts were fruitless. The shoemaker was declared dead once more and laid to rest for a second and final time. To Essie Dunbar. In 1915, a 30-year-old South Carolinian, Essie Dunbar, suffered a fatal attack of epilepsy, or so everyone thought. After declaring her dead, doctors placed Dunbar's body in a coffin and scheduled her funeral for the next day, so that her sister, who lived out of town, would still be able to pay respects. But Dunbar's sister didn't travel fast enough. She arrived only to see the last clods of dirt thrown atop the grave. This didn't sit well with Dunbar's sister, who wanted to see Essie one last time. She ordered that the body be removed. When the coffin lid was opened, Essie sat up and smiled at all around her. She lived for another 47 years. 3. Philomèle Jonta. In 1867, a 24-year-old French woman, Philomèle Jonta, contracted cholera. Not long after, she was presumed dead, as was custom. A priest arrived to administer the last sacraments, and Jonta's body was placed in a coffin. Only 16 hours later, her body was lowered 6 feet underground. Like the shoemaker's case, a gravedigger heard Jonta knocking against her coffin lid and promptly removed her from the earth, though no breath was apparent when a lit candle was placed under her nose. Distinct rhythmical sounds could be heard in her chest, and she exhibited some muscle contraction and eyelid twitching. This didn't last long, however. Jonta was officially pronounced dead the following day, and was buried a second time. 4. Angelo Hayes. Bonderson calls the case of 19-year-old Frenchman Angelo Hayes probably the most remarkable 20th century instance of alleged premature burial. In 1937, Hayes wrecked his motorcycle, with the impact throwing the young man from his machine headfirst into a brick wall. Hayes's face was so disfigured that his parents weren't allowed to view the body. After locating no pulse, the doctors declared Hayes dead, and 3 days later, he was buried. But because of an investigation helmed by a local insurance company, his body was exhumed 2 days after the funeral. Much to those at the Forensic Institute's surprise, Hayes was still warm. He had been in a deep coma, and his body's diminished need for oxygen had kept him alive. After numerous surgeries and some rehabilitation, Hayes recovered completely. In fact, he became a French celebrity. People traveled from afar to speak with him, and in the 1970s he went on tour with a very souped-up security coffin he invented featuring thick upholstery, a food locker, toilet, and even a library. 5. Manslaughter. December 8th. It appeared from the evidence that some time ago a woman was interred with all the usual formalities, it being believed that she was dead, while she was only in a trance. Some days afterwards, the grave in which she had been placed being opened for the reception of another body, it was found that the clothes which covered the unfortunate woman were torn to pieces. and that she had even broken her limbs in attempting to extricate herself from the living tomb. The court, after hearing the case, sentenced the doctor who had signed the certificate of decease, and the mayor who had authorized the interment, each to 3 months' imprisonment for involuntary manslaughter. Interesting fact, today, when a definition of death is required, doctors usually turn to brain death to define a person as being clinically dead. People are considered dead when the electrical activity in their brain ceases. 6 Miss Hockwall, Dayton, February 8th. A sensation has been created here by the discovery of the fact that Miss Hockwall, a young lady of high social connections, who was supposed to have died suddenly on January 10th, was buried alive. The terrible truth was discovered a few days ago, and since then it has been the talk of the city. The circumstance of Miss Hockwell's death was peculiar. It occurred on the morning of the marriage of her brother to Miss Emma Schwind at Eminals Church. Shortly before 6 o'clock the young lady was dressing for the nuptials and had gone into the kitchen. A few moments afterward, she was found sitting on a chair with her head leaning against a wall and apparently lifeless. Medical aid was summoned in, Dr. Jewett, who, after examination, pronounced her dead. Mass was being read at the time in Eminals Church, and it was thought best to continue, and the marriage was performed in gloom. The examination showed that Anna was of excitable temperament, nervous, and affected with sympathetic palpitation of the heart. Dr. Jewett thought this was the cause of her supposed death. On the following day, the lady was interred in the woodland. The friends of Miss Hockwall were unable to forget the terrible impression, and several ladies observed that her eyes bore a remarkably natural color, and could not dispel an idea that she was not dead. They conveyed their opinion to Annie's parents, and the thought preyed upon them, so that the body was taken from the grave. It was stated that when the coffin was opened, it was discovered that the supposed inanimate body had turned upon its right side. The hair had been torn out in handfuls, and the flesh had been bitten from the fingers. The body was reinterred and efforts made to suppress the facts. But there are those who state they saw the body and know the facts to be as narrated. Interesting fact, in 1820 Dr. Adolf Gutsmuth was buried alive several times to demonstrate a safety coffin he had designed. Once he stayed underground for several hours and ate a meal of soup, sausages and beer delivered to him through the coffin's feeding tube.